Welcome to Off the Grid, a podcast for small business owners who want to leave social media without losing all their clients.
Let's go off the grid. Okay. Let's go off the grid. Okay. I know that you really want to put your phone away. Yeah. Let's go off the grid.
Hello, and welcome to Off the Grid, a podcast about leaving social media without losing all your clients. I'm Amelia Fruby. I am the founder of Softer Sounds Podcast Studio and the host of this here show. And you, lovely listener, are in for a real treat with today's episode, because this week on the podcast, I am joined by someone that I have learned so much from, the person who taught me what human design was, the person who introduced me to the Akashic Records and like so many mystical, magical tools. I really think of her as an intuitive business icon, and she's such a prolific creator who I'm always interested in what she's up to next. So today's guest is Michelle Pellizzon Lipsitz, the founder, CEO, and head witch in charge at Holisticism, where her team shares curated tools, methods, and education for non-linear thinkers. She is the host of the 12th House podcast, which Softer Sounds produces, and you can find her leading classes and workshops on all the things I just mentioned inside the Holisticism Hub and the North Node membership. So welcome, Michelle. I am thrilled to have you on the podcast today.
Wow, that was the best intro that I've ever been given ever. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
So thrilled to have you. I'm really thinking of this episode as like an invitation and kind of a space to learn from you and as you reflect on the evolution of Holisticism, this company that you've built over the past 10 years. And I'm not even sure exactly what the timeline is.
7. We're rounding up to 10, definitely.
So I'm wondering if you could take us in to the like early moments of how you started Holisticism. What did you think it was then? And then what did it kind of become in its first iterations?
I had no thoughts, just fears mostly when I started Holisticism, but I had been working in tech and I kind of like had this alternative career path. You know, I was a professional modern dancer in New York, and I was diagnosed with epilepsy when I was 17, which kind of got me into the like mystical, energetic, alternative practices world, because my seizures, my epilepsy was basically like uncured by Western doctors, although they put me on a medication that helped some of my seizures. And I think Western medicine is amazing. It saved my life. It saved my husband's life, saved my child's life. It didn't like have an answer for what I was going through. And so I turned to these alternative practices and I found a lot of success with them. And I think being an artist in New York really helped me sort of like find my way. And I fell into kind of working in tech because I had started to work in the wellness space. I had accidentally become like a celebrity trainer, nutritionist, which was such a weird part of my life. And that had caused me to move out to LA and start my own studio in Newport Beach. And I like totally burnt out because I was doing all of this by myself. I had like no real mentorship. And I had no business running a business. I was just a wee child with a BFA in dance and probably like an attitude problem. So I figured I want to help people, right? And businesses help people. And I need to learn how to do business because I don't know what I'm doing. And I felt like there were like two options. I could either go to business school, which I was like, boo, tomato, tomato. That sounds so boring. And like, I don't want to waste 2 years doing that. 2 years is no time, by the way. I was like, what's the shortcut? What's the shortcut? Because if I start from the bottom at let's say at a regular company, I don't really have like the CV to get the job that I feel like I could probably do. I'd start at the very bottom and I don't want to do that. And I kind of like, you know, through friends had learned that if you start working in a startup, you kind of get to like practice and do whatever you want. And you can run through the ranks pretty quickly as long as you show that you have proficiency. So I was like, maybe that's the way for me. I got recruited by a startup, ended up working in tech, worked at a couple of different companies. And at every company I worked at, I would like find myself in some conversation, like in a corner somewhere, at a happy hour, like, I don't know, at a fucking ping pong tournament that we had to go to because that's what startups do. Talking to someone, they'd be like, so you're like into crystals, right? Or like, and so you know about astrology. And I'd be like, you're like a developer. Like, what do you, yeah, I'm into that. Like, I didn't know you were into that. And, you know, most of the time it was women. And I just kept noticing this trend of like people who are really smart and intellectual and logical, and were used to sort of like being analytical to get people to take them seriously, who also had this like wild intuitive side that they wanted to experience and explore. And I felt that same way, where I was like, bet, I get that. But I also am not like, I'm not Amanda Chantel Bacon. I'm not a professional astrologer. I'm not just a mystical person. And I'm also not a girl boss. I'm not a tech bro. I want to be somewhere in the middle. And I appreciate both sides of this, but I'm not like fully one or the other. I want to have some sort of overlap. So long story short, that was the inspiration for just starting a place where people could kind of have those types of conversations, meet people like that. And it just started off as a newsletter long before, back when newsletters were not cool. I'm so glad that they're cool now. Like, thank God. But yeah, it started out as just this newsletter because I was like, I don't know what to do, but I know that there's something here. So I'm just going to experiment with it and see what happens. And I ended up finding out that one thing that people really wanted was to be connected to wellness practitioners, to vet wellness and mystical practitioners, and honestly, like the resources. So, as I was kind of like growing the holisticism community pretty quickly, I felt like I saw some traction and was encouraged to like try and build something, try to build a product. So I ended up building an end-to-end booking and scheduling platform and payment processing platform for wellness practitioners to, as a like double-sided marketplace to find their clients and then to be discovered and then for people to book. And that was a really interesting experience. And what I walked away from after a lot of drama was that I realized a lot of the people that I wanted to help, they just didn't even have business. Like they were afraid of learning how to run a business because they felt it was just so beyond them because they were so creative and intuitive and like me, didn't have a degree in business. And I just felt like, but you're a genius. Like, of course you're going to figure this out. Like, it's just written in boring language. So if we can make it interesting, like I get it. If we can make it interesting, you're going to be amazing at it because all that business is being empathetic. It's being intuitive. It's solving problems. And that's already what you do. So you're going to be amazing at it as long as you don't like almost gatekeep yourself from it. And so that was what really inspired me to make Holisticism, like sort of that launched Holisticism, and I think what it is, which is this platform to help people who maybe wouldn't consider themselves business people or like action people, to help them become that and use the tools that they're already like probably acquainted with in maybe like a different context to upskill themselves when it comes to business.
I love this way that you're thinking about the people that you work with and the community that you've gathered. And I would agree. It's like full of geniuses. Like super smart, super intuitive, super creative. Like I'm always struck by how inside of Holisticism, I'm always meeting people who are doing things I've literally never thought about or heard about before. And I think that is not so common in a business-esque space, right? Like we're so often just iterating on what's already out there or trying to find the tiniest like quote unquote gap in the market. And so I love that you're starting from this place of like everyone's unique creative genius or spiritual gifts or callings or something like that. And then I'm also thinking about, as you describe it, like they just need these business skills. What sorts of offerings did you start developing through Holisticism to serve these creative geniuses that you were meeting and gathering?
Yeah, the very first thing that I created was, I called it the Infinite Well Accelerator. And I focused primarily on people who are service providers because a lot of the data that I had from basically like running this tech platform was that people were great at bringing a client in. Well, great is, let's use that, flexibly. That was the easiest part for them, bringing someone in, but retaining a client was nearly impossible. I was like, oh my gosh, but like bringing someone brand new in is the hardest part. Actually, the easiest part is like you're good at your job and you're charming and you do good work. Like, of course, they should want to come back to you over and over again because you've given them results. So if they're not, it's not because you're bad at your job. It's probably because you haven't set up the infrastructure to make it easy for that person to come back over and over again, for it to be an easy yes. And like, that's so simple. So that was the first thing that we really started with, was like, all right, it's called retention. There are 4 pillars of business: growth, revenue, retention, impact. Like, which one are you focused on? Most of us, because we're on social media, or maybe we are now off social media, but so much of what's on social and the metric that drives social is is growth, right? It's just like reaching brand new people. And like, of course, there's also engagement, but that's much less important for the most part. So yeah, that was like the first thing we started with. And it was just such a revelation, I think, for so many people to start thinking about their business in that way, as opposed to like, I just need more clients. I need more clients. I need to book more single sessions every day. Like, how can your business actually be generative? How can it support you? How can parts of it run on its own so that it's not just like constant efforting? And also like, what is the universe that you're building? Not just this one sort of like throwing one, I don't know, tennis ball at the wall every single day, but like, yeah, can these things almost take on a life of their own and exist beyond you or without you? So that was the Infinite Well Accelerator. And then we launched the North Node and in the very end of 2019. And then the pandemic happened in March 2020. And the Liminal Library was just, I was like, we'd been running events on Holisticism for a long time. And we'd been running digital events for a while. So I was like, oh, well, I know how to run digital events. And I could probably like help all the practitioners who are used to, I don't know, seeing people in person. I can like help them grow their list, which they need to do anyways. So what if I just like host a class every single day until the pandemic's over? This is when we thought it was going to be like 2 weeks, right?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Blessed night, you baby angel. So that's kind of what we did. I just like put a call out and was like, hey, you want to teach a free class? We're going to teach a class every Monday through Friday for an hour. It's going to be free. Just register. And it was crazy. Like that really blew up Holisticism. I think it got on a lot of people's radars that way. And I think it helped. I mean, I know that it helped so many practitioners who are really struggling. They were able to get in front of 500 new people just from their home. And that was amazing and so hard, so hard to manage the admin around it. But really like it was a really cool opportunity and people still use it, which is also like amazing.
The Liminal Library is a totally free resource. And I think that that spirit of generosity, like leading with that, is so powerful. And I remember encountering Holisticism in those days of free workshops and uplifting practitioners. And I'm curious how you relate to the concept of generosity and how are you actively always working to embed it in the business? How do you think about this mix of so many free things that you offer as well as all of your paid offerings?
Yeah, I know at that time, like one of our core tenets was radical generosity. And I feel like that can be a double-edged sword if you are not super aware, super self-aware of your own, maybe like shadow is not the right word, but let's just like throw it out there. Your own shadow around like worth and caretaking and yeah, if you're just not aware of that. So it was an interesting sort of path to chart because after that, we also started to run all of our programs on a sliding scale. We did that experiment for 2 years. And that was really interesting because I was like, well, what happens if we extend radical generosity to people and we like really think of this as a community effort and we enroll people in community building because that's what a community is, right? Versus like just an audience, which I would be in charge of my audience, right? But community, we're all around this like digital campfire together. We take care of each other. You know, we play roles and that radical generosity of like, well, what can I do in this moment? I feel like number one, that was just like so pandemic for so many people where we're just like, I want to be of service. I want to help. What can I help? What can I offer? What do I have to offer? And what I had to offer was like, I can organize the shit out of some stuff and like help you guys. So that seems fun and easy. But I think like while we don't necessarily practice our sliding scale anymore in the same way, I'm always thinking about like, how does it hurt me to be generous in this moment? If it doesn't, then like, why wouldn't I just do it? You know, like chances are, if you've ever worked with me, I've like just given you something that's probably worth $1,000 in terms of offerings or whatever classes, just because like I like working with you and I feel like it would be helpful to you. So why wouldn't I give it to you? And I guess I just feel like it all comes back around eventually. It's not up to me to like be too precious about it. But I also feel really solid at this point in my life. I'm 35 with knowing what my boundary is too of an energetic exchange and also like relationships. And I think that generosity comes along with building a relationship with people. And again, that's what community is as opposed to like an audience. I feel like there's more of a reciprocal relationship there. So yeah, I don't know. What do you think?
what I feel like you're highlighting is that radical generosity isn't like a 1.0 practice. Like it's not really necessarily for beginners in that way. And I think this is really important because I talk about on Off the Grid, like we build businesses with radical generosity and energetic sovereignty. And I don't mean like either or, I mean both. Like they actually have to come together because you cannot give radically or you can't be radically of service if you are not resourced and boundaried and very aware of how your energy is like flowing.
And of your own motivations. Because if you're being radically generous because you want to look good to other people, then like that story doesn't end well. Like there's going to be something that doesn't feel good, that feels out of alignment, that whatever. It's different for every person. And I'm only speaking from experience there, right? Where like, okay, done that, made that mistake before. But I love what you just said about like energetic sovereignty and like finding personal sovereignty and choice, true choice. And I think that requires like burrowing down to the depths of like, what is my primary motivator? And it's okay if one of your motivators is impressing other people. Just be honest about it, because then you're not like trying to shove it in the corner and be like, I'm not actually worried about that. You're letting it have a seat at the table and acknowledging it as one of those things that's getting you going, but it's not the only thing and it's not the secret thing. And I think that just helps us like probably create something that has more integrity, or create generosity, moments of generosity that have integrity and that have longevity. And I think like that is what I see a lot with businesses that are maybe like have an emphasis on social justice and social action, is that they are not built for longevity. And that is a shame. I think like, yeah, we haven't figured that out yet, like as a collective. Like how do we have a business that feels ethical under capitalism, that feels radically generous, that can continue to exist for 100 years? I don't really know.
Yeah, I think there's so many pieces to that question, and I'm glad you bring it up. I mean, and some of it has to do with our personal practices around generosity and energetic sovereignty, and a lot of it has to do with our more systemic expectations and structures for how businesses are built. And I think there is a way that within capitalism, there is to some extent like a seed of exploitation at the heart of this economic model that we're all working within. And we have to navigate our relationship to that. And it's something I've been thinking a lot about in terms of my own work. And having been a part of some grassroots organizing campaigns, it's also a place that I go to learn from organizers. And not necessarily in the business realm, but the people who've been doing that for decades have learned how to take care. They have learned how to navigate radical generosity and energetic sovereignty. Many of them have learned that through their own recovery from burnout and through the necessity of like the commitment to the work and to the commitment to the values and the issues and the causes that they're committed to. And like that conversation also expands outside of business, right? It's like, and how do we locate social issues within businesses or alongside businesses or partner in them? I think it's a really multifaceted ecosystem. And a question I raise a lot here or with clients is like, is this really a business? Because not every idea is a business, not every project is a business, not every cause is a business. And I know you talk about this too.
Oh boy, no, it is not. And like, thank God, not everything has to be work under the lens of capitalism, because that's so limiting. Like, you do eventually have to decide if something is a business, because it has to make you money. Like, you have to sell stuff and you have to solve problems for people. That's what a business does. It's okay that things don't solve problems for people. It's okay if things don't make business. We need that in life. Like, we definitely need that. But the trend has been to probably not just trend, like how to survive is how can I monetize this thing that I'm interested in? Because then I can justify continuing to be interested in it, right? Especially like add on things like ADHD, where we sort of like need really exciting novelty and we need that like fear and anxiety, norepinephrine to like get us motivated to get going, to stay with something. I think it's really easy to just like try and make everything that you're excited about a business. And also we collectively view businesses as more important than like hobbies or art practices, even just from like a class perspective. So it's much easier to justify what you care about if you say that you're like making a business around it, even if it's a failing business.
Yeah, absolutely. All those Nepo babies out there running their businesses, and we laud it even if we have all of the evidence that shows that it's not making money. By calling it a business, it becomes a marker of success. And there's a lot underneath that for sure. I want to come back to holisticism a bit because I want to ask you about the North Node. From my perspective, outside of your business, in 2020, everybody launched an online community. Everybody had a Mighty network. I advised multiple of my friends to start one. I was like, this is the answer for all of our businesses. And then over the past year, most of the ones I was a part of have shut down. They couldn't get enough members to have enough support to maintain them to have longevity. And so from my perspective, the North Node has been kind of this success story and a little bit of an oasis that's still thriving as a community. And so I'd love to hear how do you think about the North Node as an offering, and what role does it play in the holisticism ecosystem?
Basically, it's a library of my brain and of other people, amazing, talented experts who have come in and helped us to effectively, in my dreams, I wanted this gigantic, almost business school library where any question, intuitive business school, where if you had any question, you could search for it and you would find an answer. And we're kind of getting to that point because we've been running it for 4 years now. There's a lot of content in there. But when I first started the North Node, I had been doing, I'd done consulting throughout my time in tech. And then when I started Holisticism, I'd worked one-on-one with people, I'd launched courses, and I felt like at the end of my time with someone, I felt like I was abandoning them. I dumped all this information on them, and then I was like, okay, go do it. Great. And I kind of felt like, at least for me, the problem is never getting the information. I will research until my eyeballs fell out of my brain, but it's implementing the research. It's doing something with it, right? And having the accountability and the support to take those next steps. And so that's what I wanted the North Node to be. I wanted it to be this implementation hub where people could work on their own time too, not be under the gun of, let's say, an 8-week course or a 6-month, coaching container. I've never done anything like that, but let's say that's, many people do that, where they had to get results or they had to practice and implement in that amount of time because life happens. And man, life has happened to me over the last couple of years where I've had amazing plans and then something comes up that takes priority. And so I have to extend my timeline on the things that I'm working on. And that doesn't equate to failure at all to me. It just is that's just responding to life. And I wanted to give people that flexibility too, and that cocoon of support. And honestly, just knowing that okay, if I have a question, if I need it, I have this amazing resource in my back pocket, and a community of people who are like me, who might be going through the same, challenges, who maybe have already gone through those challenges that I can just peer-to-peer have a convo about. So yeah, that's how it started. And then it's grown and changed so much. It used to be monthly content that I would put out, so much monthly stuff that I would put out. And now we've moved to a quarterly model, which feels way better for everyone. It seems like our North Node members prefer it, where we focus on a concept for 3 months. And then we have within that 3 months, the learning, we have the asking questions, and then we have the actual implementation where we have basically a challenge where people can run through the steps and implement what they've learned if they want to in real time. So that's happening in real time. And then you also have this library of content that's asynchronous. So if you're not a live sort of follow along with the class type of person, you can sort of choose your own adventure, do interdependent study, I suppose, and use the North Node however you like. But yeah, I think it's this really important part of the business that I almost feel like I don't talk about that often because it's just I know everything about it. And I feel like everyone knows everything about the North Node, but I do actually, I'm oh no, it's actually so secret. People still don't really get what it is or know what it's about. But yeah, we're so lucky that to have hundreds of amazing entrepreneurs in there and creators. What a dream.
I think this secret piece, though, I want to pull on that a little bit because I think this also has to do with how you market it. And I would love to hear a little bit about how you plan your marketing and think about your sales cycles for the North Node. Because what I've noticed is that there's a wait list all the time, but then you open the doors sometimes, but I don't ever get emails about that. So I think you're doing like beautiful, like behind the scenes secret marketing. Can you just tell us how it works, please?
Yeah. There's so many different models for running a membership community. You can have either doors open all the time, or you can have so open enrollment where anyone can join at any time, or you can have doors closed and then a limited enrollment period. And I've found that I just like don't personally have the stamina to always be marketing and always be selling. That's not your girl. Because I have like so many other things that I'm interested in talking about that I feel as if it would almost be boring to only talk about the North Node all the time and be pointing people to it. So we have a wait list and we open the doors twice a year. I feel like that's a nice cadence for us. And we also decided at one point as a team that we didn't want to like exponentially grow the North Node because we reached a capacity at which it felt like if we added any more people, we would need to add more team members. We just felt like, whoa, in order to give people the care that they need at the caliber that we want to give it to them, like we just can't have like 10,000 people in this community. We have to limit that number. So we really do have a limited number of spots. It's not just a marketing play. And sometimes we don't have to open up the doors because we haven't lost any members. So we don't really have new spots to refill. Sometimes, depending on like what our bandwidth is, we feel like we can add more members. We as a team like went through some hard things as a team last year. So our bandwidth was, I would say, lowered. And we open up the doors usually every 6 months. And then we also have a wait list. And occasionally when people drop in the middle of, let's say like a quarter, I'll invite someone up off the wait list who's been on the wait list for a long time. And then if they don't join, no biggie, they just get reinvited to join when the doors reopen, like at the end of the year and usually at the equinoxes. Or winter solstice and then the summer solstice.
And when you say open the doors, like what does that entail for you? What are you doing or sending or sharing during that period?
Yeah, so I treat it like a regular launch where I'm making content that's sort of aimed towards getting people through the stages of awareness from, problem unaware to solution aware. And, like the North Node is this interesting like beast of a product because it's changed over time, like who it's for. It's certainly like clarified itself, but it's really like, yes, an intuitive business library. But also, you don't have to be a business owner because there are a lot of people who don't run businesses who are in there. You don't have to necessarily be intuitive or into the mystical stuff, but a lot of people are. So it's a little bit like, kind of feels almost like a vibes at this point where it's like, I don't know, if you're this type of person, you'll probably like it. So we open the doors and we'll promo. We'll have, usually I like to teach a couple classes because I'm the main headmistress inside of the North Node. So I like to teach some free classes just to give people a taste of what the North Node is about and what they might expect from it, my teaching style, and then how it can help them. And we have inside of the North Node these basically an archetype path that you can follow from the seeker to the detective to the alchemist to the advocate to the visionary expert. And at every stage, there are new things that you're going to learn that are sort of the fundamentals of business and growing a business. So I like to explain that to people. And then, once the doors are open, I'll take everyone who's on my lead list, who's opted into events, who's signed up for lead magnets, who's on the wait list, and I'll send them a series of sales emails. And that's kind of how it goes. It's pretty stress-free. I probably should ramp it up and use ads and do more stuff, but I really like how it works right now. And maybe that will stop working eventually, but yeah, it works for right now. I find more often than not when I'm changing my marketing strategy, it's less because it's not working and it's more because it's just not interesting to me anymore. And if I'm not interested, then it always is going to fall flat because people can feel that energy. So a lot of the time when I'm experimenting with something, it's because I'm like, what would be so fun to me? What would make me excited to promote the North Node or to talk about the North Node? So we've done a lot of different stuff over the last few years, but it is still kind of this mystery offer.
I love this so much. And I think what I'm hearing you say as you kind of unpack how you do this is there's this kind of base rhythm maybe of you're always building a lead list. You have the wait list and a lead list that's just always being built. And then you're going to open the doors twice a year, most likely around the equinoxes. But how you get those leads is like full of experimentation and fun, and like you let yourself play. And I love this question, like what would be exciting to me? What would make me want to like say yes to this, is the way I think of it a lot, is like, what would I say yes to immediately? And can I create that thing? And again, I think that is like also in the spirit of generosity. And I've also seen you like experiment with free or low cost workshops or like different ways of building that. And I'm so curious, like, do you have a sort of favorite thing that you're excited about right now, or like way that you're adding to your lead list in this season that you're like, oh, this is really fun and I'm really into it?
Good question. I mean, we moved over to Substack as a platform for putting out our podcast and putting out our like weekly newsletter. And that's just been fun we just did it to just see like, oh, people interacting, people sharing, more people adding themselves to the list, more people clicking the North Node link. Very interesting. I think that one thing that's been really cool that I'm like, slay, I love that this works, is teaching an affordable class, something that's like $19, $20, up to $30, that kind of is almost like not junk food, but it's a little bit more fun. It's a little less like business girl, and it's a little more, intuitive alien, and kind of like mapping that back to maybe like how you might approach the work that you do, and teaching that before we open the doors to the North Node. And I feel like that like light sort of like easy offer that people are like, oh yeah, that's a easy yes. Getting like 200 people in a class like that, it makes them take it seriously because they show up and they're excited about it. And then it gives them a sense of what it's like to actually learn from me as a teacher that you're paying money to. And I've noticed that a lot of people who end up coming to those classes will end up joining the North Node afterwards, or end up joining whatever. If I'm about to launch a class, they'll end up joining that bigger class. It's almost like an amuse-bouche or something. And I love that because I love teaching, and like I don't love selling things, but I love teaching, and I like love prepping, like giving you weird shit. And I love making things for people. That kind of like scratches my itch in a really fun way, and makes me feel like, oh, nice. We've made a little money from this, and that's cool. It's not going to pay all the bills, but like it's nothing to sneeze at when you make $5,000 off of a class,
Hello, my lovely listener. Amelia here, interrupting this amazing conversation, because if you're enjoying this episode, the one you're listening to right now, I think you would really love the Off the Grid Clubhouse. The Clubhouse is a paid podcast, newsletter, and asynchronous community space for friends and fans of Off the Grid, hosted on Substack. It's where I share my monthly biz forecasts, bonus episodes about my hot takes, personal feelings, deepest, darkest, brightest, lightest ideas about online business, and more. I also send out a monthly link roundup called The Click Through, where I gather everything that I have been reading, watching, and intrigued by with regards to internet culture, social media happenings, and online business at large. That's also where I have been chronicling the many, many, many announcements I see lately of people taking breaks from social media or exiting platforms entirely. And all of the posts in the Clubhouse have community comment threads where you can ask me questions, share your experiences, and chat with other Off the Grid listeners. It only costs $5 per month or $50 per year to join the fun, and I truly hope that you will head to the show notes and check it out. I look forward to seeing you on Substack, but for now, let's dive back into this conversation. I want to ask you about the team, because I know that has also evolved. And as even just your podcast editor, I have worked with different people on your team over the past 2 years. And I know that it's kind of expanded and contracted, and you took a maternity leave. So could you tell us a little bit about like, what has your team structure, like maybe what was it like in 2019, 2020 when you were starting the North Node, and then how has it changed since then?
Yeah, good question. So when I started the North Node, right after I started, I hired my first employee, Thais, and she was our sort of like customer service rep, like community lead organizer. And then we hit the pandemic, and Holisticism, like really, like many online businesses, just like, whoa, kicked up a lot. And I did everything. I did everything myself. So I made all the content, all the posting, as all small businesses, right? That's you're wearing every single hat. And probably 6 months into that, Thais and I really realized that we needed help. She wanted more help with community stuff because it wasn't her favorite thing to do, and she didn't really like doing customer service stuff either. And I loved Thais with all of my heart, but she's like, this isn't really what I want to do. I want to be a writer, but I like helping you. And so that we ended up hiring Janelle to come on and be our community lead. And Janelle is still our community lead. And I was like, oh, I really need help making content because I make so much stuff, and it would just be so nice to be able to delegate to a writer or to have someone write sales pages or even come up with course content and maybe write a lesson or two. And so that's how I met Wallace and hired Wallace. And so then we were all of a sudden a team of 4. And yeah, we trucked along like that for a while. Thais left to go write full time. And then it was me and Wallace and Janelle and then our wonderful VA, Arby. And then when I got pregnant, I realized I really needed someone to step in when I was on maternity leave because it was really important to me that I was able to take time off. And so I hired Jessica, who was our amazing project manager, is an amazing project manager, and wasn't quite sure what's going to happen. You never know what's going to happen when you go on leave for anything. When you take any type of sabbatical, right? That's usually something big in your life is changing. So I wasn't sure even if I was going to come back to wanting to do the same type of business. I just had no clue, and kind of realized that what I love doing is making things. What I don't love doing is managing people, and even with amazing people, right? You owe them an amazing management experience, I think, as their boss. You owe them time, your attention, your care, your mentorship, your leadership, teaching them how you do the things that you do so that they can then do those things at their next gig. I always have thought about when I work with someone, I'm prepping them for their next job. So I want to ask them well, what is it that you want to master for the next thing that you want to do? What is the job that you want after this? Let's prep you for that. Let's try to put you in the position to be able to test and practice those things, those skills, upskill yourself so that you can do that. I feel very lucky if I get to work with someone for longer than a year because I think that's just the average of usually the time that we spend with people. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So I just felt once I had Rhodes, I didn't want to be in meetings anymore. I didn't want to manage people. And I was looking at the business and also realizing that there were so many ways that I could simplify it and just honestly grow it the way I wanted to, even maybe maintain it the way I wanted to. And so that was a really scary and interesting moment to look at some of the projects that I'd taken on and be I think I need to cut that. Good for You is my baby. It was so fun to make. It was this awesome podcast that you produced and tried to make a whole community out of it and a newsletter out of it. And it got some pickup, but it didn't get enough traction to really justify the investment that we were spending on it and the time investment and the financial investment. And pulling that freed up a lot of resource for me and also helped me realize, where are the other things that I've been trying to make work, maybe under the realm of holisticism that shouldn't even be holisticism. That should just be their own products. That should be their own businesses. That should not even be a product or a business. They should be project that I do on my own, in the privacy of my garage. So that was a really interesting and scary moment to be whoa, okay, well, if I'm not going to do these things, then that cuts a lot of people's hours because that's what they're working on. They're helping me manage that. And thankfully Wallace and I are psychically connected, and she wanted to go to grad school. The day that she told me she wanted to go to grad school was the day right before I was about to give birth. And she was I want to go to grad school. And can you write a letter of recommendation for me? And I was yes. And yes, I was literally in labor writing on a bouncy ball, writing her letter of recommendation. She got in obviously because she's a genius. But I was okay, this is interesting because I know when I come back from mat leave that I'm only going to have Wallace for X period of time. So it just the universe was kind of yeah, that's right. Simplify. And then of course, coming back, it just became even more obvious because I was I just want to be with my baby or asleep or making stuff. I don't really want to be in a logistics meeting. And is this logistics meeting that necessary? Like, how many of these things can I just like get off my calendar and we'll be totally fine? I think that creep happens when you're growing a business where you are adding things on and you're growing and you assume that because you've added things on, it's why you're growing. But then you really need to like ask yourself, get really clear with yourself. Is that true? And test even like stop running that meeting for 3 months, see what happens. Does the business fail? Does something totally tank? Have you totally dropped the ball? Okay, then maybe you need it. But if not, then like it's probably just a waste of your time. So yeah, long story short, that was happening. And then Ethan got sick again. And my husband, for our dear listeners, my husband has an anaplastic astrocytoma brain tumor. He was diagnosed in 2017 and he'll always have a brain tumor. He won't be in remission. They don't call it remission, but he was managing his tumor and then his tumor recurred in February of this year. And we have like, you know, a 1-year-old baby and I have this business. And all of a sudden it was like, well, the most important thing is making sure that like he's okay. And because it's such an extreme diagnosis, it's a death sentence to many people when you get that diagnosis. Triaging it was vital. And I could not plan what was going to happen with my attention and energy or like with holisticism. And so I also felt like, okay, I need to do right by everyone who's worked with me and be upfront and say, I don't know what I'm going to be capable of doing. I don't know if I'm going to be able to work. And this business is amazing because it can make income without me, but it makes less income if I'm not present. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to keep up with all of our bills for the next year if I'm not able to work. And that's not fair to you to like put you in that position. It's also not fair to you to like not have any work to do because I'm not present. So I ended up like, and we hired KP along the way, our wonderful social media expert. So we ended up kind of like naturally cutting back hours, and Jessica also ended up coming back from maternity leave and sort of like moving on to other projects. And so the dust kind of settled, and now we have still our small team of Janelle, KP, and Arby and Reg. But everyone is, you know, Janelle is an employee, but everyone else are contractors. And like right now, it feels really good. It's really stressful. I will say being responsible for people's livelihood, that's like always going to be really stressful for me. And having that added stress of like my husband being really sick and being the primary caregiver for him and for my son when we don't have like a nanny or daycare or stuff like that, it was just a lot. And so that like necessary simplification came back where it was like, okay, you got to simplify even more. Like, what are the most essential things? And it's been a really good lesson. I mean, I wish I didn't have to learn it, but you know, I'm learning it. And yesterday, Ethan had a scan and his tumor has not grown and it has not shrunk. So it's technically stable after 6 months of chemo. So that's really good. That's a really good sign. He won't have to do chemo again for a while. And now it feels like I can finally breathe a little bit. We both have a little bit more flexibility to like begin to vision some other things.
Thank you so much for really taking us through it. And I mean, so much love to you and Ethan and Rhodes. And I'm just really sitting with and hearing the like stark reminder of the ways we spend our time can be really life-giving, but we have to like prioritize and protect that because it can pretty quickly, especially as business owners, that our time can just get drained away into all of these other things that aren't actually our priorities and don't actually like give us more life. And I'm hearing you just describe the ways that over and over again, I feel like you've been coming back to that and like finding the magic and the life and the joy in your work. And I appreciate the transparency around like how that has shifted and the pressure of employing people. I hear you on that. I only work with contractors, but I have an assistant producer who's now on retainer. And even that just feels like, all right, we are committed. I mean, this is now like, doesn't matter how much work I have, I'm paying you this. So it feels like I have to stay on my game. It feels like, it does feel like a pressure. And it's someone I like adore and love working with and love paying money to, but also it's a lot to carry.
Yeah, it's a lot. And when you have employees too, like, I'm people's healthcare. Like people have insurance because they work for me. Like I can't just, you know, I feel, of course, Of course, like someone out there would be like, well, it's just business, it's not personal, but it is kind of personal, but I do care about the people that I work with. So I want to make sure that they're taken care of. And like, I have been trying to be really like aware, stay aware and stay like sensy with myself during this really intense time, like especially these last, 6 or 9 months since the recurrence of like, okay, am I like really close to burning out? Am I feeling it? Like, is this healthy for me? What's healthy for me? Because not to be like dramatic about it, but like I need to survive. Like I need to live. I need to live for my son and I need to live for my partner and I need to live for myself because like I have a whole beautiful life and my business is really important to me right now, but it's not the best thing I'm going to do with my life. So it's not the most important thing. It's really important and it helps a lot of people, but it's not the most important thing in the world. And just reminding myself of that, of like, it's not the most important thing in the world. And there's always a more creative solution. Like whenever I feel stuck, I have to call myself in and be like, there's another way. You just haven't figured it out yet. So you just have to figure it out and you're going to have to think more creatively. And I can only think more creatively when I'm not burnt out. So if I'm burning myself out, then that's a sure sign that I'm going to fail or whatever, or that it's going to feel stressful or it's going to be scary or whatever, because I'm going to be stuck in this one track mind of like, this is the way I have to do things. So my creativity is intrinsically linked to those like generative moments in my life. What is generative to me? And ultimately that makes me a better boss. It makes me a better parent, makes me a better friend. It makes me a better teacher. And like, that's honestly why I want to have a business, right? Is because I want to live and I want to have experiences that like continue to develop me as a person and help me like, not to get so out there, but like help me understand like why I'm here and make sense of this world. So it's not really like often I have to zoom out and be like, I'm just racking up experiences. Like that's what I'm doing down here. I'm trying to experience as many things as I can and learn from them. So what can I learn here? And I feel like that really helps me with like, I tend to be very rigid in my thinking. It helps me be a little bit more fluid. And it also helps me evolve, like let something evolve as opposed to be like dedicated and committed to it turning out a certain way where I can be like, okay, yeah, there's still like a lesson in this, or there's still something to garner from this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like when I'm in my most rigid thinking or what feel like my most stuck moments, I really grip on like, if I'm going to do this thing, it's got to work. Like it has to work.
And it has to work this way that I imagined it. Yeah, totally.
And it never does. When you're in that place, it's never going to happen.
And it feels like shit. It feels awful. Like everything feels awful. And that's usually a good sign for me where I'm like, wow, this feels like the worst. I only see one way out of this. I know that's wrong. Thank God that's wrong. Okay, great. And just because I can't see it doesn't mean that there's not an answer out there. It just means I can't see it. So my job is to figure out how I can see it. And that like is changing all the time, right? Like depends on where I am in my life. But I mean, I think that's why art is so important. Culture is so important for us to experience because it gives us these new perspectives through which to understand and see and experience the world. And that like unlocks things in our brains. I mean, same thing with like somatic work. Somatic work will literally retrain your brain and your neural pathways. So you stand up from like a Feldenkrais class and you fixed your shoulder, but you're also like, oh wait, I guess I forgive my mom. That's so weird. And like, it wasn't like you were thinking about it, but it just like, that's an exaggeration, but that's kind of how it works. And I think all of that feeds into what we do at Holisticism and with business is like, we need to stay open to these other ways of doing things because they're out there and they're possible. And you can totally take the door that everyone else takes or that everyone tells you should take. There's nothing wrong with it. But if you don't like that door, like there's tons of other options for you. So you don't have to walk through it.
Then that's, exactly what Off the Grid is saying about social media specifically. And of course, online business more broadly. As you're kind of moving through this period of unknown and of challenging things, I'm curious, like, what are you looking toward for Holisticism? Like, what do you think the sort of landscape of the business will be in the next rest of this year, if that's as far out as we're looking? Like, I'm just kind of curious what your mix of offerings is right now. How much one-on-one work are you doing, if any? Is it all the North Node? What's your ecosystem made up of?
So I have started doing one-on-one work after I had Rhodes because I really it was so weird. A couple big things changed overnight. I went from loving TikTok and loving making videos on TikTok to being I never want to be on that app again. Literally overnight where I was can't get me on there. And we grew a pretty decent following. So I think KP was okay. And going from, I just want to I want to teach as many people as I can. I love having big classes. That's really exciting to me. It's not that interesting to work one-on-one with people, to being I just want people to be in my living room. I want to have my tight little crew of people. I want to sit with you. I want to really get to know what you're working on and help you individually. Being really excited about that. When you do consulting and one-on-one work, the time commitment is different and the focus is different, and where you're doing your work is a little bit different. So I think that was really appealing to me as a mom too. And I've just gotten so much joy out of working one-on-one with people. And I've run a couple of different sort of one-on-one containers. They're not technically programs. It's a focus. And so I work month to month with people because I'm not really into you got to sign up for 6 months, or you got to sign up for a year. I just feel I don't know. Am I going to want to work with you for 6 months? Maybe not. Maybe we'll get through everything we need to get through in 4 weeks. Why would I hold your feet to the fire for longer than that? And I work with my clients for an hour every week, and then we do Slack, and it's really fun, and it's really interesting to me as a person with ADHD that I get to hyper focus on someone else's business, and I just am so enjoying it and finding a lot of pleasure and success with it. And I love the North Node, and I feel I get to scratch my group itch. That was a gross way of saying it, but you get what I mean. I get to work with a community of people that I know very well in the North Node, and it's so great. And I just feel really lucky that that's what the business is kind of looking like right now. And I committed in probably July, I think, of this year to leaning into this archetype in my matrix of destiny called the hermit. It's in my most important sort of karma position. And I was oh, I probably should practice that a little bit more. So I wanted to give myself the challenge to not launch any sort of big group things for the rest of the year. And also sort of that helps me focus on what's going on with E, and gave me a little bit of space, breathing space, and just thinking space. And it's been really interesting to not do that. I basically told myself I can't do that for until the end of the year. So we'll see. I have some plans for things that I am excited about, but I'm definitely going to continue to do one-on-one work. We're definitely going to keep growing the North Node. And then I think I might retire some of the courses that we've been running for the last couple of years, like Notion for Magical Baddies, System Spells, and our class on creating content. That's an 8-week class. I think they might have reached their point where it's time to let them rest. So we'll see what happens next. But I have all these other projects that I'm really excited about that I'm working on outside of Holisticism. And that doesn't take away from Holisticism, but I find that a past version of myself would take any passing interest and be okay, I'm interested in this thing. How can I wrap it up so it makes sense with Holisticism? It would almost desaturate the message or what I was excited about because I was trying to fit it into under this umbrella when maybe it didn't want to fit there. It just wanted to be under the umbrella of my ideas. So I'm trying to honor that a little bit more and decide, is this a Holisticism thing or is this something totally itself? And Spacies is a good example, I think, of something that's totally separate that has a life of its own.
I feel starting a business can be this really integrative moment where it's all your work comes into this one beautiful container, and that can feel so good, especially if you are a very curious, passionate person like ourselves with so many interests, and you're oh my God, finally the one thing where I'm bringing it together. But once you get almost immediately, as soon as you integrate it all, it starts to kind of splinter off again. It's the projects build, and it's not everything has to live there. So I love how you're thinking about that. And it's been so joyful to watch Holisticism grow and become a business that it seems like can kind of maintain so that you yourself have the energy and capacity to work on other projects. And I just wanted to ask you to tell us a bit about two of those projects, one of which is a business, which is Spacies, and one of which I don't think is a business, which is Cosmic Valley Girl.
Definitely not a business.
So could you tell us a little bit about each of those and kind of like briefly how they started and what they're becoming for you?
Yeah. So Spacies is our gigantic notepad company, I guess. We're calling it a creativity company because that's, I think, the like emphasis. And who knows if we'll make more things. We'll see. But yeah, when I was pregnant, I love Notion. I love Notion so much. And sometimes I just need to write stuff down in order to actually get it out of my brain. And I kept like upgrading my notebook sizes, you know, going from like the standard size to like bigger and bigger and bigger. I was like, there's not enough paper. There's not a big enough notebook for my ideas. So I was like literally trolling the internet for a giant notebook, not a drawing pad, not a watercolor pad. That's not the right texture. I wanted just a notepad, and I couldn't find anything. I wanted to like sit underneath my computer basically. So I was like, I'm just going to order like 100 samples from a paper manufacturer. And it was so expensive. And I was like, okay, well, I might as well just like make something and then sell a bunch of these. And then I can get my notepad. And that kind of like got me thinking about like, interesting. You know, as I started to interview people and be like, is there something here? The more people I talked about this idea with, the more they're like, oh my God, I need that. I want that. That's how I think too. And I just couldn't believe that it didn't already exist because it's so stupid. And then I thought, like, you know, what is that? Like, what's going on there? Like, why do I want that? When do I reach to like write out my thoughts? And that's usually when I'm feeling really stuck or when I'm trying to envision something, or even like I'm trying to like almost confirm something in my memory. Like I'll write out my schedule for the week to like lock it in, right? Because there's something about the ephemeral nature of the digital that like is unsatisfying. And KP has been like instrumental in helping me come up with the concepts and like the sort of like lore around why we're making this thing, because it's really hard for me to make things without like a reason and an intention behind them. So it's kind of like an oracle card meets a giant notepad meets like an infinitely customizable planner without the preciousness of like a daily or monthly planner. And yeah, we're like very limited on stock right now. So I've got to put some more orders in, which is really exciting. And it's just been cool to see people like really embrace the brand and it be totally separate from Holisticism. It's been a fun experiment.
Yes, I love them. I have one of my own. I also just want to say that getting it delivered is also hilarious and fun because you ship it flat. So you get this ginormous package, which I love and also deeply appreciate because there's nothing worse than like ordering a poster sized thing and it arrives rolled up and then it literally never lays flat ever again.
Can I just tell you, this was the bane of my existence for like, this was my biggest stressor this year actually, was getting Spacies pads to people that were not damaged. Like, because we tried so many different things and of course we're not going to roll this thing up. It would never unroll and it would look like shit. And this is probably why people have not made this thing, because it is a bitch to ship. But like it's amazing. Like I love it so much. I honestly, sometimes I'm like, I can't think without my Spacies pad in front of me, which is maybe not a good sign, but I'm glad that you like it. And I'm glad it was fun getting it. It is kind of like comedic to get the giant box on your doorstep.
It feels a little, like clown sized. You're like, am I too big or am I too small? I don't know.
And then you just like pull out some paper. It's so funny. Yeah.
Yeah. And I also want to say, I love the newsletter that you've built around this as well, where you're really asking creative people these like fascinating questions about their practices and preferences and ideas. And honestly, it reminds me a little bit of like early Into the Gloss days where you're just like really getting into it.
That's an honor. Thank you. I mean, like, I'm a creative person who's so fucking nosy. I just want to know, like, how do other people come up with ideas? And I loved going to art school because I just wanted to be like, I could ask anyone, like, how'd you do that? Like, how'd you come up? What do you do? Like, how do you come up with that? What's your process? And have them teach me their process. And I don't know. I think a lot of art is just mimicry at first. It's copying what someone else does and then feeling into it and finding what aligns with you and what doesn't align with you. And I don't know. I'm not like an expert artist by any way, shape, or form, but I keep finding in my own practice that like as soon as I come up with my way of doing things, I'll usually run into a roadblock, my process. And then I need to like find inspiration outside of it to get me to see it from a different perspective. And seeing other people work is like so inspiring. And also just getting permission to work differently. Like not every artist has to wake up at 6 a.m. and do their morning pages. And I don't know.
I'm physically incapable of doing that. So
I actually break out in hives if I try to do morning pages. It's so weird. I mean,
like the body's keeping that score for sure. So before I let you go, I just really want to hear about Cosmic Valley Girl.
It's such a good example of just a project like that. I feel like Spacies too. Spacies was like an open-ended project where it was like, well, maybe this thing will work. If it doesn't, great, then I'll know I can close the door on this project. But Spacies has been successful, so that opens up a whole can of upgraded problems for me to solve. But Cosmic Valley Girl came from just a conversation I was having with my friend Emily Rousseau, who's like a genius, total like autodidact, but also like incredibly educated genius in astrology and literature. And she just published her first novel. And we were talking about how, like so many movies that we see are like seeped in reference. And because of, I think, internet culture and meme culture, we've lost the connection to the reference points in art that make that art really juicy and exciting and interesting and layered and like satisfying to experience as a viewer, that make them feel like either like just like superficial cotton candy or rote and predictable and like made on a Pinterest mood board. Nothing wrong with that, but without any curiosity about where those images came from, just like purely the visual. And we thought it would be so fun to take a look at some pop culture stuff and be like, what are the references for this? Like, where did this come from? And what was the screenwriter like reading at the time? Or what was there going on in their chart? What was going on in the collective chart that was sort of influencing how this thing got made or why it got made? And that kind of grew into, well, there's esoteric in everything. There's the arcane in everything. It influences everything, whether we like it or not. So how can we sort of shine a light on that and point it out? And now we're at Cosmic Valley Girl, where we're kind of like playing with pop culture and the mystical and the arcane and the artistic creative references in some of our favorite things. And so our first season is on ghosts, and sort of like, I'm not doing a great job of explaining this as an elevator pitch, but the whole concept is like, how do we, we make art to try and capture the unseen, portray the unportrayable, right? And we're doing that with like everything in our toolkit that we possibly can, with sound, with imagery, with dialogue, with like even, sensation sometimes. So as people who maybe are experiencing what's unportrayable, whether it's love or ghosts or grief or, I don't know, being haunted or something else, how close do we feel like the simulacra is getting to that? Like, does it feel like it's getting it? Or maybe are we influenced by like our idea of what a ghost is by the media that we've taken in about it? And now I'm, that's really like getting creepy, where I'm like, oh yeah, I know ghosts because I saw Casper the Friendly Ghost. So when I see a ghost in real life, I'm like, oh, that's weird. You don't really look like a ghost I thought you were going to look like. So we just kind of wanted to like talk about that. So our first season is all on ghosts. And so we're looking at 8 movies that have ghosts in them or that reference ghosts, including Ghost, obviously, the Patrick Swayze, Demi Moore, Whoopi Goldberg classic, Casper the Friendly Ghost, Rebecca, the 1940 Hitchcock film, The Sixth Sense, classic. There's a lot. There's a lot of really fun things that we're playing around with. So we look at the chart, we look at what's going on in the world, we look at how that movie sort of like unpacks the unportrayable, and then we decide, did it do a good job? Do we feel like it's a reference point that everyone should know, or something else? And then we also look at the other things that that movie itself references. So it's just like a fun project for us to say like a lot and watch our favorite movies and talk about the mystical.
It is definitely the film podcast I have been craving but couldn't find anywhere. I love film and I go to the movies a lot, and I have searched and searched for podcasts about movies that are not hosted primarily by white men And it's so hard to find. So I just want to make a plug that I'm just like super grateful that not only are you doing this in your like beautiful way, but it's also just filling this need that I really have. I've told my partner, I'm like, I'm going to be so mad if I have to start a film podcast. Like, I don't want to, not really for me, but I need one. So somebody has to do it. And thank you, and Emily, for doing that.
I mean, I feel you on that. Like, there are many things where I'm like, I don't want to fucking make this, but I need it in my life. So glad that you're liking it. And hopefully we can continue to live up to expectations and get better. You know, podcasting is so interesting because it's like such an experiment where you're like, the first, I don't know, couple of episodes, you're still just finding like your flow. So it gets better. Wait till the Sixth Sense episode. That one's, I think, my favorite of the season.
What a treat. Well, I will link to that in the show notes. I will link to Spacies, Holisticism, the 12th house, everything that you do and we all love. Is there any final things that you would like to share with or send listeners to before we sign off?
I'm really bullish on Substack right now. So that's a good place to usually find me as Michelle Pellizzon, the solo entity. But yeah, follow along on Holisticism's Instagram and of course the 12th House podcast that you so lovingly produce for us and do such an amazing job. You always make me sound so much smarter than I actually am. And I'm grateful for that. And, you know, I'm pretty accessible. So people can always email me. And if you have any questions, you can reach out there.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Michelle, for your time. Thank you, listeners, for joining us. And until next time, we will see you off the grid and probably in the astral plane. Thanks for listening to Off the Grid. Don't forget to grab your free Leaving Social Media toolkit at offthegrid.fun/toolkit. This podcast is a Softer Sounds production. Our music is by Melissa Caitlin Carter of Making Audio Magic, and our logo is by Natelier Studio. I'm your host, Amelia Ruby, and until next time, I'll see you off the grid and on the interweb.
Let's go off the grid. Okay. Let's go